First time in many years, we are honored to welcome a new managing director of PDO to come to the stage, Steve Phimister. Well, good morning, and welcome to I suppose obviously many people have said it to you already, but from the collective industry in Oman, which ultimately is the gathering of this group in this room this morning. Welcome to your new post. How has it been settling into Oman and your new challenge?
Well, I've been here 4 months now, Sean, so I think you can imagine just how chaotic it feels. But I mean, the welcome from everybody has just been second to none. Probably the warmest and most embracing welcome I've ever had anywhere in the world. So a big thank you to everybody for that, and not only in PDO, but right across Oman. It's great to feel so welcome into a new role. Yeah, a bit challenging during COVID, doing it all virtually, but super happy to be here. Thank you.
And Steve, you're coming into your new role, inevitably the head of a national energy company, a national oil company, as they're called, but obviously into, as I mentioned in my opening, a transition. Obviously, you're coming from Shell, which is a global IOC, international oil company, but also one that's going through a major transition. How do you see coming from a major company working globally, taking on the challenge of the transition, and now coming into a national company in a country in the Gulf? The transition challenge is also on the ground. How do you see the difference between the gap, perhaps, between the two, and what can be done to advance the national?
Interesting question, but it's not that dissimilar, because what we're trying to do is respond to an external context, an external stimulus, the like of which we've never seen ever before. I've been working in the business for 30 years, and during the whole of that time, essentially the energy system has been, to all intents and purposes, quite stable and static. Obviously, we see a lot of volatility in prices, and we see cycles in our business, but essentially our role in the energy system and globally has been pretty consistent. Now that is far from true, and the pace at which that change is coming is accelerating dramatically. So whilst you move from a global perspective in a corporate into a country role and a company that is focused first and foremost on Oman, the issues are identical. The context is identical. The pathway in which we can achieve decarbonisation of hydrocarbon production and the pathway to industrial decarbonisation through the industry is the same thing. The portfolio looks different, but it's all the same issues. And we can afford to approach that, I think, in the same manner. There is, of course, the same kind of issues associated with how you partner and collaborate across the sector, outside the sector, in government, regulators, and also in international markets. So you're playing in the same pond, to be fair. It just has a different look and size and shape for your portfolio.
When you think of, obviously, the commitments that Oman has to make, like every country, commitments to the Paris Agreement previously, to the COP26 outcome, in a country with a major hydrocarbons portfolio, how can we, as an energy sector, support the commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement targets, etc., COP26 Glasgow now, and at the same token, if you like, sustain energy security?
Yeah, it's kind of the $64 million question, isn't it? But I think the first thing
we might be answering that one for the next 20 years, but nonetheless, you can start today.
Look, I think the first thing to note is that, of course, the NDCs, Oman's NDCs, are rooted in Oman's Vision 2040, okay, and the National Energy Strategy. So that is going to support that transition, albeit gradual, from where we are today to a low carbon economy, and also a mix that will be significantly lowering carbon emissions. So whether that's deployment of renewable energy or the deepening of energy efficiency, these are all carbon control pillars that we have within them. And the use of those, or the application, implementation of those, will definitely enable the Sultanate to slow down its emission growth which is where we are today, and then reduce it by the 7% or more by 2030 from business as usual. So it's clear that as a sector, we have a mandate around energy security and economic prosperity, but we also have to work to support those NDCs. And so in the first instance, that means we have to produce cleaner energy. So we have to adopt new technology, electrify our business, employ digital solutions to tackle our own emissions. Then as a sector, we obviously have to move into lower carbon fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia and so forth, and other facilitators. In my world, I believe that includes CCS. We've got to develop and strengthen new supply chains by leveraging the existing infrastructure and supply chains we have in oil and gas, and then explore that cross-sector investment. It's clear to me that this is not a single sector discussion. 85% of emissions generated in the world come from the consumption of hydrocarbon or the consumption of energy systems, only 15% by its production. So if you're not working with the customer and you're not working cross-sector to tackle consumption, then you're not tackling the heart of the issue. And then, of course, we need platforms like this to exchange best practice. So in short, for me, it's about decarbonize our own emission base and help provide solutions to decarbonize industry. It was noticeable, actually, how much time was spent at COP26 on the principle and the concept of sectoral decarbonization. And I think we have a role as a sector. In fact, I'm a strong believer that we definitely have a role and a place in sectoral decarbonization. We can help produce and bring solutions by repurposing our infrastructure, our skills, our people, our way of working, our finance. And in BDO, we've actually defined a strategy that will do that to tackle our own emission base and then move into sectoral decarbonization in support of the MAN's NDCs. And in fact, I'd like to go beyond that and go further if we possibly can.
There's been a number of studies and I think case study evidence now that the net economic benefit of every dollar invested in building climate resilience. And however, the green shift, is not always a profitable posture. We had the challenge and the opportunity of Glass Point here in Oman. Great idea, never really quite made it in the scale up. How can we sort of, when we move to the synergy of water, food, energy nexus and the requirements that have for sustainable transformation, whilst ensuring ultimately the critical point of profitability?
Yeah.
All the easy questions.
I'm enjoying these easy questions this morning. Look, I think certainly there has clearly been some progress on this front, but it's undeniable how big a challenge this remains, right? So sustainable development, particularly around the nexus, it's not a new concept. It's at least a decade since we've been talking about it. And I think the problem statement still remains to a large degree. We see that here clearly in Oman. Just take scarcity in agricultural water or issues in terms of accessing water and electricity in some cases. They're all very real. They're live. I think the good news is that if you look at a Vision 2040, energy, food and water all appear as strategic sectors in Vision 2040. So it gives us a framework to work on it. I think in essence, I'm very much in agreement with the comments from Dr. Rumchi. His Excellency is that at the moment, each of these sectors are largely working on their own agenda. And probably what we need here is an overarching agenda to help drive sustainable transformation, one that's competitive. And that last word, competitive, is the key one, because you're playing in international markets. So we have to be able to do something to not only sustainably transform each of these sectors through the nexus, but also remain competitive. And there probably are some fairly straightforward crossovers we need to be talking about. For example, emitted CO2 can be used sensibly in smart farming, and that is being done around the world, e.g., being used for intensive seaweed farming and so forth. Use of produced water from the energy sector rather than re-injection or disposal is being used now potentially to produce green hydrogen. So you're not consuming new water sources. Water usage in particular, I think, versus efficient allocation to food and energy is critical. The balance in that ecosystem is challenging.
Well, when you consider that desalination delivers 90% of potable water in Oman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as an energy sector, PDO, we produce substantial amounts of water and have to manage that water and the energy consumed in managing that water. And so there are crossovers immediately to how can you use that in biosaline agriculture, for example, which is something we've been working on and researching in the interior and NIMA around the reed bed. So I think there are important crossovers for us to, if we have some umbrella and a way to govern that work. We need some frameworks. But unfortunately, we're also going to need quite considerable investment in the near term to make that a reality.
Well, there lies some of the challenge. Ultimately, the investment is critical. The fiscal health of Oman is getting better as the oil price recovers. S&P Global Ratings revised up Oman's credit outlook to positive last month from stable. Which is in the right direction, but there lies the challenge: the ability to spend and invest in some of these big costs, while at the same token maintaining a credible credit posture, if you like. Steve, Phimister, I mean, I was just coming back to the first question, and it sort of seems apt now, and the difference from an international actor. Obviously operating all over the world, but in a sense, somewhat reactive at times, but trying to lead maybe in certain areas. But here in a country like Oman, the national energy company is seen as a leader regardless of what you're actually, your business you're in. But my point is, does the national energy sector, does the national energy have a responsibility to lead in this rather than the food sector or the water sector in Oman? How do you see that balance, if you like, as such a big national energy actor? I was with Aramco the other day, and they were talking about the role of Aramco and how they're called upon to do all sorts of things. They built the Saudi pavilion in the Dubai Expo. And are responsible for staffing it for the first 6 months, because Aramco gets things done. They know how to do things, etc. I mean, the same way PDO has that kind of posture in Oman. I'm wondering where you see the responsibility of leading in the nexus, and on your thoughts.
Yeah, interesting question. So do major oil companies like PDO or my colleagues on the panel have a role? Yes. Do we lead? Well, I think that depends. So if you're talking about the nexus, we have definitely got a role to play in that. But PDO is in some regards a water company as well as an oil and gas company, right? So produce a large amount of water.
I think is it fair to say about 1 to 10 in terms of production?
Thereabouts, 9 or 10 barrels of water to every barrel of oil, indeed. So it's clear that we have a responsibility and accountability to manage that resource. We don't produce food, but the nexus joins us together. So I spoke earlier about how we need the right framework, the right governance in place together with government and regulators to be able to do that. But do I need to stand up and be a leader and lead by example? Yes. Absolutely, and as Walter was just saying, I think we absolutely have a role in that. I mean, if I take water management as an example, we have already in place a clear policy and a strategy to reduce, reuse, and relocate. So if we're producing 9 to 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil, we need to do something responsible with that. So we reduce by trying to minimize the amount of water that we produce, which is an efficiency matter, because if it comes to surface, I have to process it, I have to consume energy to deal with it, I have to re-inject it or use it otherwise. And so there's an energy efficiency factor. I can reuse it because I can maximize oil recovery in the process by pressure support, but I can also relocate it and take it from areas where there's excess water to where there's a shortage. And we do that. We manage our water resources extremely carefully. In the north of Oman, we're reusing currently for salt making. In the south, we're putting it to use in agricultural purposes. We completed a research project in NIMA at our reedbed location last year and tested salt tolerant species for agriculture, so for biosaline agriculture, which is something we're going to go ahead with. And I think, MEM, the ministry and the Research Council put together the Oman Water Hub just last year as well. So there you have water professionals, which come from other sectors and other companies, together with academia and government and the oil sector, putting together ways in which we can innovate and solve problems in water. So I think water is a very, very good example of where we cross over in the nexus. And in a water short country, it's a particularly important matter for us to manage. So yes, I think we need to stand tall and manage not just the production and the responsible production of hydrocarbons, but also how we manage across sectors in the nexus. I think that's really important for us to play a key role. Sean, there was a couple of quick things I just wanted to touch upon, and if I may, to close. I think the first thing I observe, and it's less prevalent in Oman and the GCC, but other parts of the world it's dominant. The first thing is I feel the debate is polarized. And I think that society generally is pushing to trying to switch off the current energy system before we've actually designed and built the new one. I mean, the key word here is transition. And so what I heard at ADIPEC is a very clear sense of how we need to use COP27 in Egypt and COP28 in Abu Dhabi in UAE to shine a light on this issue. So as players in the energy system, we're not complacent or arrogant, but if one turns off one energy system before you design and build another, you're into a supply crunch and you're into energy deficiency, particularly in developing or less developed countries. And we need to be cautious of that. I think today people are already talking about supply crunch because investment in hydrocarbons has turned down dramatically in the last couple of years. So we need to be conscious of that factor and how we are going to continue to sustainably invest in hydrocarbons in the transition. We're committed to the transition, if it is a transition. And I think secondly, picking up on something Walter said on trust, is that as an industry globally, I don't think we've got our narrative right yet, because we see ourselves as part of the solution, but I don't think most of the stakeholders, particularly the court of public opinion, agrees with us. And we have a lot of work to do to demonstrate and build that trust, to have the right to be a part of the solution. And I do think that COP coming to the region, North Africa and the Middle East, will make a big difference in that. And I think
it will, but it will also put a spotlight on the inconsistencies, as it did similarly in Glasgow, as it did to Qatar when they were hosting the World Cup or their prep. It will come with a spotlight of opportunity, but also of challenge.
Indeed, but I think we're up for that, right? And so I don't think you can work your way through this without being part of the dialogue.